This is singles exchange. Let's talk, let's hang. This is singles exchange. Singles exchange.
Welcome back to Singles Exchange, a podcast that focuses on conversations, connections, and community. As always, I'm your host, Joy J, and I am excited about this topic today. If you are a frequent listener to the podcast and you know the drill, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Singles Exchange on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and whatever your streaming podcast platform may be. Be sure to share this with a friend. I think that this is a topic that is age old. I think that it's one that comes up in most dating relationships, and I think it's going to be a good discussion. So get comfortable and let's exchange. You guys know the drill. So today we're talking about texts from my exes, which if you're a Cardi fan, then you know that is a line from one of her songs. And she said, I like texts from my exes when I want a second chance. Now listen, some of us don't like texts from our exes, and there's some reasons for that, and we'll get into that a little later. But before we get that far into it, my first thing is talking about what is an ex. Let's just quickly define what an ex is, because everybody has a different view of who's an ex and who's not. Like, I've heard people say that exes fall off after 7 years, like on your credit report. Like, I've heard people say stuff like that. I know some people that don't count people they dated while they were teenagers or in their early 20s. I know people that say, I don't have any exes. I know that there was a point in my life where I was one of those people. And I was like, I don't have no exes. Whatever. It's people I dated, and, once they're out of my life, they no longer exist, and that's just that. So I think that everybody has a different view of what is an ex. Now, if you follow the Facebook page, you know that sometimes I'll throw out a question that will come up in a podcast episode later. And I did that with this question of what is an ex? How do you define an ex? And I wanted to share some of my favorite responses. So first we'll talk about Raquel. Raquel said that I like to consider them lessons, but once I block you, you're no longer a thought. And I think that's a good way to view it. I think that in every relationship or every situationship or entanglement, whatever your business is, I think that it's important to learn from it, even after it's over, because they won't all lead to like marriage or a long lasting thing. Some relationships will end. And I think that it's important to learn your lesson from whatever that is, because it's not always about, he did me wrong or she did me wrong. It's not always about, the blame game and who's at fault, but what lesson can you learn from this? How did you mature and grow and change in this relationship? What did you learn to do differently in your next relationship? What did you learn about yourself from this relationship? Because a lot of times we tend to look at what the other person did and we tend to not acknowledge our own flaws. But the reality is relationships require two people. And so there will be some things that person may have done wrong, but there will definitely also be some things that you could have done differently. So I think that's important, Raquel. Alana Fox said that time and significance to my life is how I choose to label them an ex. I think that's an important thing too, because somebody that I may have casually dated for a month or versus someone that I seriously dated for several years are not going to hold the same weight as it relates to my past. There are some people who I casually dated for, a short period of time. And at this point, I couldn't even tell you their last name. Like, I literally would have to rack my brain, like, what was his last name? Just because you didn't hold weight Whereas there are some things about exes that I dated for longer periods of time, and there are some things that I still remember about them because they were more prevalent. And that's just normal, it's just like I went to the same elementary school from kindergarten through 8th grade. So there were some students who were only there for a year or maybe 2 years, and they don't hold the same weight. I don't remember as much about them as I would somebody who was also there from kindergarten through 8th grade with me, because there were quite a few of us. Shout out to those of us from St. Sabina Academy. So yeah, that's a good point, Lana. Dee Dee said, the only one that I claim as an ex is my ex-husband. The others are like mistakes. And I can understand where you're coming from with that. I feel like as it relates to exes, there are some people that are mistakes, like flat out mistakes. There are people, I know for me in my past, there have been guys that I saw the red flags, I chose to ignore the red flags. Or I saw where we could potentially not work, and I chose to ignore it or look past it or try to work through it. And my point was proven later that I should have just left it alone. I had this one guy a few years ago. I met him online, and he was a really nice guy. We talked, we had some things in common, we went on a date or two, and he was literally like, I think you're a great catch. One day, I'm gonna marry you. And I was like, huh? And he was like, yeah, I'm gonna marry you. And at that point, I was already having some reservations because we had a difference in opinions about religion. And he was like, oh, I don't care about you being a Christian. You can be a Christian. You can raise our children as Christians. I just don't want to be a Christian. And I was like, but that doesn't work for me. And would y'all believe I still consider dating that man? I went on a couple more dates. We hung out a little more. And it got to the point where I was just like, okay, I know this is not going to work. This is a huge clash for me, because I would prefer that my husband have the same religion that I have. So we ended up breaking up, and well, not breaking up because we didn't technically date seriously or exclusively, but we chose to no longer talk. And I think, to me, that whole situation, allowing it to move beyond that particular day, was a mistake. So, Dee Dee, I understand where you're coming from. Jessica Lynn said that an ex is anybody that raised your blood pressure. Honey, I agree. So, I think that when you're involved with somebody sexually or romantically or both, they are closer to you than other people. So they have the ability to irk you, to annoy you, to irritate you, to get on your nerves, or to tick you off like no other. They have a different spot in your life, and they hold different weight. So I could definitely agree with that. For me, I think that an ex is anybody that you were involved with romantically or sexually. If there were any type of feelings involved, they were an ex. Even if you never had a title, even if it was an entanglement or a situationship, or a friends with benefits type of thing, I think that they are still considered an ex. And the reason that I think that is because if girl code and or guy code applies, they're an ex. Like, if you had a friends with benefits type of relationship with somebody for 6 months or for a year, and a year later you found out that one of your friends was dating them and they knew about it, they knew that y'all were involved and they still dated them, you'd probably be mad, right? You wouldn't be okay with that. So to me, that says they're an ex. Like, if you don't hold any weight in my life, you're irrelevant. Like that guy that I told y'all about, who was not a Christian, I wouldn't be offended if one of my friends dated him because we never had strong feelings. We never had sex or anything like that. So, hey, y'all want them, have at it. Be great. But I definitely have some exes that if any of my friends dated them, I would look at them like, this what we on? This is where our friendship is. So, as far as defining an ex, apply girl code or guy code. And if the rules apply, they're an ex, honey. I hate to break it to you. So, some of us probably have more exes than we care to admit. And that's okay. That's life. We all grown, and it is what it is. Now I want to talk about choosing to connect or reconnect with an ex. So, I want to tell you guys what my personal preference is as it relates to exes. I used to be that petty person that was like, I don't have exes. If we dated and we no longer date, you no longer exist. Like, I used to be petty like that. I'm trying to be better in 2020. I really am. But we'll get to that a little later. Before we talk about whether or not I would prefer to connect with exes, I want to talk about 2 success stories that I know of people who reconnected with their exes. So, first I want to talk about my brother and my sister-in-law. They dated in their teenage years, and, you know, they was great. They were involved, whatever. They chose not to continue their relationship into adulthood. They both became adults. They both married other people and had children. And then they both ended up divorced. And they reconnected and they were married. And now they have another precious nephew of mine. And it's all great. So they were a tale of, you know, I guess you could say they were like high school sweethearts. And they went on about their adult lives, had children, like they did the whole 9. And then when they came back together in their late 20s, early 30s, it was another thing. And they've been married for, I want to say 5 years, but maybe 6. I don't know. They've been married for a while. So they were a success story. Another success story that I love to tell are my pastor and first lady. They got married to each other. They had their oldest son, and some things happened, and they chose to separate. They literally got a legal divorce, and God allowed them to come back together. They reconnected. They got married. They had another son. And then later on down the line, they got custody of their nieces and nephews. So now they have a house full. But I love my spiritual parents. And I think that their love story is very unique. Because people don't talk about reconnecting with exes. A lot of times, especially in situations where there's a full-blown divorce, people tend to not discuss whether or not they rekindled or reconnected. So I think it's great. So, and y'all gotta bear with me because I've been talking and singing all day. So my voice is doing its own thing, but it's all good. So as for me, Joy does not necessarily like to reconnect with exes. I'll give you my reasons about myself, and then I'll give you my reasons about my past experiences. So, for me, when I reconnect with an ex, it is very likely that I will fall back into old patterns. And it doesn't matter when I date them. I could have dated them 10 or 12 years ago, but I tend to fall back into old patterns when I date or reconnect with an ex. And I don't think that's good. I don't think that's healthy. I think that if you are connecting with somebody in 2020, your pattern and the things that you do and say should be reflective of 2020. It should not be what happened in 2006 or 2008, that's long gone. So, yeah, it is not my preference for that reason. Also, once my heart has moved on, it's very hard for me to go back. So, if you really know me, you know that I love hard. When it comes to relationships, I am going to give it 110%. If things are not working, I will pull all of the stops. I will, try everything to make sure that it works. Like, I don't easily give up on relationships. So, if I have gone through all of those extensive processes of trying to make it work and, hoping that things will get better and then they don't, and then I've additionally gone through the process of grieving that lost relationship, grieving the time and the energy and the money spent, grieving the memories. If I've gone through that process and I've gone through my healing process, I don't want to go back. Like, I worked too hard to have to go back and redo all of the stuff that I just undid. And I know for me, healing is hard because, like I said, I love hard. I give my all to relationships. So when I am trying to move on from an ex, I have to totally disconnect. I know that everybody's process is different, but for me, I have to totally remove myself from that person. We cannot hang out. We cannot talk on the phone. We cannot text. We cannot be friends on social media. I'm not the delete the pictures type of person. I probably hide them from my timeline, but I'm not the delete the pictures type of person until way later. But I don't want to look at them. I'll take them down and put them away. One of the last serious relationship that I was involved with, I had all of this like framed pictures and poems and letters from him. And when we broke up, I put all those things away. I gathered them up into a box and I put them in my closet. But it was over a year before I actually got rid of them. I wasn't ready to let go yet, but I didn't want to see them. It was too hard for me to look at that stuff on a regular. So once I went through all of that healing process, if he would have came to me and tried to like get back with me, I don't think I would have received him well. And I think that's most of my problem. With most of my exes, I am very civil. I don't, have an issue. If you speak, you speak. I am friends with most of my exes on social media, on some social media, whether it's Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, something. I'm friends with most of them. Not all of them, but most of them on something. Because they understand their place and they understand that there is no going back for me. And we are just friends. Now, I do have a few exes that I chose not to be friends with on social media platforms, either because I wasn't comfortable or I felt like they don't necessarily know their place and they try to, might try to get back in, or I just don't feel the need. Like, there are some things that I believe that once you chop it off, like once it's cut off, we don't have to go back. And that's my past experience. So I do have some exes that have attempted to cross a line, and I just don't want to go there. Like, I'm not a drama person. I don't really want to get involved in all of that. So, for me, it's better if I just don't be involved. So, yeah. I said all of that to say that once my heart has moved on, once I've healed, once I've gone through all of those processes, reconnecting seems redundant to me. Like, I worked too hard to get free. I don't want to go back. So that's just that. Another reason that I choose not to reconnect with exes is because, in my experience, when exes have tried to come back around, they tend to think that what I accepted before or what I allowed before will be allowed now, and that's not the case. So it's just better to not, for me, to not get involved. Like I said, I try extensively in relationships, so once it's over, it's really over. But we'll get off of that because I don't want y'all to think I'm on here bashing my exes. The last thing I'll say about my exes are, I've learned that for me, my exes are good for short-term fun. You know, if I just want to go out on a casual date, I have an ex in Chicago, and every once in a while, when I go to Chicago, we'll go out to dinner or something. But that's it. It goes no further because that season is over for me. But not everybody feels that way. So, as always, you know it wouldn't be me if I didn't give y'all a couple of points. So, if you choose to reconnect with your ex, here is what I recommend to you. The first thing is, don't try to pick up where you left off. I know that sounds a little off or sounds a little crazy, but do your best to start fresh. Treat it almost as a new relationship. Like, you may know some things about that person, but treat it as a friend trying to get out of the friend zone. Don't go back because when you go back, you pull up old feelings, and sometimes that includes anger and bitterness and resentment. And you don't want to carry that into any relationship, whether it's with an ex or not. So, my example of that is a few years ago, like I said, an ex tried to reconnect with me, and he was trying to like make conversation, and he was like, "What's wrong? Like, you not laughing at my jokes?" And I was like, that was 16-year-old me. Like, we dated when I was 16, and 16-year-old me liked that. 16-year-old me found that funny. At the time, I was 28, and I was like, I'm 28 years old. That was 12 years ago. That's not funny to me anymore. That's not entertaining to me. And so I think it's important to don't try to pick up where you left off. Learn that person for who they are now, not who they were when you previously dated them. And that leads me to my second point of starting with a clean slate. So starting fresh, sometimes if you choose to reconnect with an ex, you will need to talk out your lingering issues. So there may be some things, some discrepancies from your past that have not been dealt with. Deal with them. Talk them out. Do what you need to do, because it's important. Like, you need to address what's going on, and you need to do it quickly. If you want to move forward with that person, talk it out. You know, tell them, you did this back then and that bothered me, but I want to let it go. Or, you know, maybe there just needs to be some clarification. Hey, the last time we were involved, this happened, and I need some clarification on your intentions or your thought process or whatever. Talk it out. Have the hard conversations. Y'all know one of my mottos is have the hard conversations, because if you don't, then it'll be a repeated cycle. That stuff will fester and it'll get bigger. The last time that I tried to reconnect with an ex, we were hanging out. We were just friends, hanging out, going to dinner, going to lunch, or whatever we were doing. And it got to the point where I literally had to just tell him, I don't feel comfortable with you enough to date you again. There are some things that I feel are unresolved, and before we move any further, we need to talk this out, Now, upon talking it out, I decided that, I didn't really want to pursue that anymore. But have those conversations and be honest about what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and tell them, like, the intent behind this is not to bash or to play the blame game, is to clear the air. So you do that and you make the choice to move forward. Don't hold their past against them. If you're choosing to allow them back into your life, get the clarity that you need and move on. Don't bring up no old stuff, no old arguments. Don't go back to the you always did this and you never did that. Like, don't do that. If you are going to reconnect with an ex, let it be fresh. Let it be a clean slate and a new start for you. So, we're right at the 25-minute mark. And as always, I try not to go over 30 minutes. So, thank y'all for talking and listening in with me. If you think that this episode is beneficial for someone, share it with them. If you think that it's worth a conversation, if it's a conversation starter, share it with somebody. Play it in the office at work for those of you who are back at work like me. And, let's talk about it. Let me know what you think. You guys can always hop on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube and let me know what your thoughts are on it. And y'all know I like to talk, so let's talk about it. The last thing that I want to tell you is my birthday is next week. Woo, woo, woo. My birthday is Wednesday, August 26th. And I have an announcement to make about Singles Exchange. So I am planning to make that announcement at 10 a.m. on the Singles Exchange Facebook and Instagram page. You do not want to miss this announcement. So I would suggest that you make sure that you are following the Singles Exchange pages. Make sure you're all caught up because you don't want to miss the big announcement that is celebrating my birthday. Okay? So, thank y'all for kicking it with me. As always, I enjoy sharing my thoughts with you, and I look forward to exchanging with you soon.